Hi guys, Miss O'Connell here. So today I'm going to show you how to take the average using Google Sheets, how to graph displacement versus time, and how to graph and decipher the velocity versus time from a Google Sheet. So you can see on my screen here I have the data from trial 1 and from trial 2. So you should go ahead, pause the video, make sure that you have your trial data in the Google Sheet. Pause when you're ready to start graphing. Okay, so you have unpaused the video because your trial 1 and trial 2 data are now in the Google Sheet. To take the average in Google Sheets, we're going to use an equation to format our cells. So if you see under table 3, you're going to click on the distance, right? So table 3 is an average of the distance values from your two trials. So we're going to equate this cell to be equal to, so you're going to type in the equal sign. So that cell is equal to the average. So type in the word average. It'll begin a function. Average of, in this case, we want our first distance position, which is cell C3, with the average of this exact distance, comma, this exact distance. So I have the average of C3, comma, G3. So I just take the average of those two values. I'm going to close my parenthesis. Okay, and this cell will equal that average once I press enter. Okay, so 0 plus 0 divided by 2, we get 0, and we can see here that it has calculated, using this equation, the average of the distance values. If you select the next row and column down and begin with an equal sign again, it'll actually suggest the equation. Okay, so its suggestion is to take the average of cell C4, which we can see is highlighted, and G4, which is highlighted, which is the next two distance values, which is exactly what we want. So if we press enter, it's going to add in that suggestion there. If we press enter again, it'll calculate the average. Okay. To quickly fill the entire row of averages, instead of individually typing in each equation, we can highlight our two data points. So you're going to click and drag to highlight both 0 and your second position point, which will probably be different than mine. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner of those two highlighted cells, you see a blue solid square. When you hover over that square, a plus sign appears. Once that plus sign appears, you're going to click and drag to fill the remaining rows in the second column. Once you release your finger from the keypad, it will fill in automatically the averages. Okay, and you can click and select the cell to double check that. So it takes the averages of each consecutive point, calculates the average for you. Okay, so we can use Google Sheets to perform calculations for us, okay, in a quick, simple way. Great, so now that we have our average from our two trials for distance versus time, we need to graph that data to analyze it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select the titles, time, distance, and all of the data from table 3. We're going to graph the average of the trials. So once your data has been selected, it turns this light blue color. You're going to go up to the toolbar. You're going to go to Insert. You're going to find the word Chart. Once you click Chart, a chart editor pops up there on your screen. Under Setup, Chart Type, we're going to select Scatter. Okay, we always want to use a scatter plot in physics, not a line graph. We're using a scatter plot. So please change chart type to scatter plot. Double check that your x-axis is labeled as time in seconds and that your series, meaning the y-axis, is measured as or labeled as distance in centimeters. Okay. We see here that we have a chart title and axes labels. You can actually click on these titles. When you click on them, you can, if you double click, you can change them. Or you see over here that your menu, your chart editor, automatically moves to the segment of the editor, which changes the chart titles. Okay, so I'm going to double click again on the title. We're just going to make that title a little bit more specific. So we have distance versus time of a tumble buggy. I'm going to press enter after I'm done typing so that it saves my title. My y-axis should say distance in centimeters. My x-axis should say time in seconds. If it does not, under the chart editor, if you click on customize, the second option down says chart and title axes, or chart and axes titles. See that arrow? If you click that drop down arrow, you can change the horizontal axis. Okay. Right above in the green text where it says horizontal axis title, you can click that drop down menu and change it to chart title. Vertical axis title. Okay, you can change it right in the menu as well. Once you have your chart title, your axes labels, you can collapse that segment of the menu. Now that our data is labeled, we need to analyze the velocity, meaning use the data to find a best fit line. To do that, in the chart editor, under Customize, you're going to find the word Series, which is the third option down. Next to Series, you're going to click the drop-down menu. Under the drop-down menu, you see options to change the color of your data point, the size of your data point. If you keep scrolling, you see Format Data Point. Below that, there are 3 checkboxes that you can select. Error bars, data labels, and trend line. We're going to select trend line. When you select trend line, it's going to automatically fit a linear line with the form y equals mx plus b to your data points, which is exactly what we want here. So you check trend line. Under type, it says linear. Right below that, you see something about line opacity. Below that, you see label. The label setting is pre-selected to none. We're going to click where it says none. We'll see a drop-down menu pop up. Your options are none, custom, and use equation. We're going to select use equation. What that does is it gives us the equation of the line, aka our slope, and displays it on the top of our graph. So we see that adjustment there. I have 20.1x minus 3.58. Okay, so once I have the equation on our graph, I'm going to scroll back up and I'm going to collapse the series part of the menu just by clicking on the arrow next to the word series. Last thing here, Okay, your graph might look a little bit different, but as you can tell by my data points, that my y-axis is broken up in increments of 100, which makes it very difficult by sight to see what the y coordinates of any of these data points would be. So to fix that, under the chart editor, under customize, we're going to go all the way to the bottom where it says grid lines and ticks, and we're going to expand that out. Under grid lines and ticks, we see another drop-down menu. That drop-down menu says horizontal axis. Okay, my horizontal axis, my x-axis, is broken up in increments of 2. Okay, which accurately portrays my data points. So I don't need to add any minor grid lines in here because I can read all the x coordinates of my data points. However, I cannot read the y coordinates. So I'm going to click the drop-down menu below the words grid line and ticks. Okay, so we see the green words horizontal axis. I'm going to click that drop-down menu and change it to vertical axis. Under the word vertical axis, we see major spacing type, step. Below that, we see minor spacing type, step. If it's pre-selected to count, you want to click on the word count and change it to step. So you should have minor spacing type, the word step below that. Next to step, we see minor step. I'm going to add in steps or increments of 50 and see how my graph changes. So when I typed in the word 50, right, my graph is now broken up into increments of 50 on the y-axis, which still is not specific enough to read some of my data points. So I'm going to make that increment a little bit smaller. Let's try 25. When I change it to 25, my data points are easier to read, but there are still 2 or so that I cannot accurately gauge the y coordinate. So I'm going to make that even smaller. I'm going to break my graph up into increments of 15 by changing the value under minor step. Okay, now all of my points are easy to read, so I don't need to decrease my step value by any more. So again, that step value tells you how much or how many increments your graph will be broken up into. So if I have 15, that means that each of those dashes represents an increment of 15. Once we have our grid lines, we can collapse that segment of the menu. We can exit out of the chart editor. To make our graph easier to work with and easy to read, we're going to select the graph. We see 3 little dots here, which we call the hot dog. We're going to click on the hot dog. We're going to move the chart to its own sheet. Okay, so we can see here our trend line with our data points. We have our grid lines, x-axis labels, title. Up on top of the page, we see the equation of the line, 20.1x minus 3.58. So what that tells us, right, we have y equals mx plus b is the equation of a line. M is 20.1 for my graph. And my y-intercept is a little high, should really be 0. So this is what the equation of this line is. Okay, so that means that the value in front of your x is the slope. We know that the slope of a position versus time graph is the velocity. So that means that the velocity of my cart is 20.1 centimeters per second. Okay, so I get that from my position versus time graph. Next, I'm going to go back to my data tables. Okay, we see velocity in centimeters per second. I'm going to type in the slope. Okay, so my slope was 20.1, which was my velocity. I'm going to type in 20.1 for each of my cells. And then I'm going to go ahead and graph my data. So I'm going to select all of the points in my data table. I'm going to go to Insert Chart. We should see a flat horizontal line. I'm going to do the same process again. So we have setup. We want chart type to be scatter. On the x-axis, we want time in seconds. Under series, the y-axis, we want velocity in centimeters per second. Under customize, we need to add in a trend line. So under customize, we're going to go to series. Under series, we're going to scroll down until we see those 3 check boxes. We're going to check trend line. It's going to give us a linear trend line. We're going to change label from none to use equation. Okay, when you look at this equation, right, you have 1.35 times 10 to the negative 15. So that means 0.15 zeros, 135. So what does that mean? That means that our slope is 0. Okay, so the slope of this line would be 0. Okay, we don't need to add in any major or minor grid lines, okay, for our x or our y-axis. So we can exit out of our chart editor. We can click again that hot dog, and we're going to move our graph to its own sheet. And there we go. We have our distance versus time graph and our velocity versus time graph for our Tumble and Buggy.